Good morning, Rosalie, and anyone else who might be watching this. So, I sent you the starter, and so what you're going to do is you're going to take the starter out of the fridge, and you're going to feed it equal parts all-purpose unbleached flour. It can be any kind of flour, long as it's unbleached. This happens to be King Arthur, but sometimes the market's out of King Arthur and I just use the store brand or any other brand. But what's important is that it's unbleached, because the starter does not like the chlorine. I think it's chlorine anyway. That's bleaches flour. So unbleached flour. Okay, so I fed my starter last night, and when you feed your starter, it's going to take it 3 or 4 hours to get frothy. Okay, so so it's going to look on top a little bit. It's going to have a bunch of bubbles, a lot of bubbles. It's going to look a little bit like beer looks on top. Okay, I mean, after all, this is yeast. So and you're going to feed it equal parts water and unbleached flour. Okay, and then let it sit out on the counter for 3 or 4 hours. All right, so once we do that, then we're going to start the bread baking process. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put, this is for 1 loaf of bread. I usually bake in doubles, but I know you're going to bake 1 loaf at a time, so we'll do it just the way you do it. Okay, so I'm going to add to my bowl 1/2 cup of starter, which is right about there. Yep, right there. And I'm going to grab a spatula here. I'm going to get it all out. There we go. Look at my spatula. It's the Day of the Dead spatula. I bought it in Bernie, Texas. Anyway, there's that. Okay, so we've got 1/2 cup of starter. And then to that, we're going to add 2.5 cups of flour. That's 1. That's 2. I don't level them off. I kind of eyeball it. And there's another 1/2 cup. Okay? And we can give that a stir. Nothing too interesting, just looks like a lot of flour right now. All right, then here's the secret ingredient. I learned this when we're in the travel trailer. I bake bread in the crock pot, a little tiny crock pot I have. And I was watching some YouTube videos, and yeah, spoon. Let me grab a spoon from over here. I was watching some YouTube videos, and somebody was talking about baking bread with just yogurt, not using starter at all. So I added some plain Greek yogurt. It can be non-fat or fat, either way. But I like the Greek yogurt because it's really thick and it's no flavor, plain. Okay, so we're gonna add 1/2 cup of plain Greek yogurt. Okay, the fat content doesn't make any difference. So what I understand is, I've never tried it, but I understand from the videos that if you didn't have starter, you could just do this with the yogurt. I mean, it makes sense because it's a culture, so, right? It's alive, it's alive, it's alive. All right, so we're going to add that. Last, we're going to add the salt and the water. First, we're going to add the water, then we're going to add the salt. So the thing about the salt is, I add the salt after I've stirred this up for a while, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So now we're going to add the water. So the water, how much water you add is going to depend on the altitude and the temperature, okay? If you decide, and I don't see why anybody would do this, but if for some reason you decided to use bread flour, or that's what you had, you could certainly use bread flour. It's just going to take more water because bread flour requires more hydration. All right, so all I've done right now, so what's in here now? 2.5 cups of all-purpose unbleached flour, a 1/2 cup of the starter that we fed and watched it bubble. That's when we started to use it, after it bubbled, and a 1/2 cup of Greek plain yogurt. All right, now we're going to add the water. So I'm going to go over here and get the water. Okay, so I have a cup of water, but I don't know that we're going to use a cup. So we're going to dribble the water in. This is what I do. I have the starter in here, which is fine. So I'm just going to pour I poured like a 1/2 cup of water in, and we're going to stir it up, and we're going to see what the consistency is. I'll show it to you in the bowl. So see, I think it's still too dry, right? It's kind of dry. I have a flour that I made, I have dough that I made already earlier, so I could show you what the consistency of the dough should be. So I'll show that to you. All right, so this is still a little dry, but we'll mix it up really, really well. All right, I don't take the dough out and put it on a floured board and knead it. It's not necessary. My hands get all messy. I don't like that. All right, so it's still too dry. You know, it's like, it's just not wet enough. It doesn't come together. So we're going to dribble a little bit more water in. A little bit. Okay, now we'll see what happens now. So here's the thing. Your dough can be too dry, but it's really hard to get it too wet. I mean, if it's really wet, it's going to be difficult to work with. And what I do then is I just add a little more flour. But, okay, so this is good right here. So I added about, let's see how much water I added. I added like 3/4 of a cup. Yeah, that's what I added, 3/4 of a cup of water. And that's kind of been my experience when I've done a single loaf, okay, previously. All right, so now I'm going to show you how we stir it. And then, so let me show you how we do this. Okay, so there's the bowl. There's a spatula. I just turn the bowl. It's kind of hard to do it when I'm holding the bowl, but it's fine. All right, and I just turn the bowl, lump it over, push it back, lump it over, turn the bowl, push the top over the bottom of the dough. There we go, like that, all right? Now, I haven't added the salt yet, and here's why. Because the salt dehydrates, right? Like when you salt a vegetable, it pulls all the water out of it. Okay, so we don't want to do that yet because we want the yogurt and the starter and the flour all to come together for a while. All right, so I turn the bowl and flip the dough over, and I do this about, I don't know, 6-7 times, right? You know, turning and flipping. And then I take the dough in the bowl and I put it in the oven. The oven is off. The oven's going to stay off. I just set it in the oven. And then I come back in a couple hours and I do the same. I'm looking at how many minutes are on this video. Okay. I do the same process again. I take the bowl out. Spatula's already in there. I turn the bowl, turn the dough. Okay, turn the bowl, flip the dough over itself. All right, then I put it back in the oven for another couple hours. I may go out and do errands, whatever. If it's 3 hours, it's fine. If it's 4 hours, that's okay too. But every couple hours, generally, I come back and I do that, okay? And I do that until it'll take, it's more about the hours, I suppose, than it is about the, take this out of here. Until the dough is like this. You know when you see the guys in the pizza store and they're making pizza dough, right? And it's stretchy. See, stretchy, stretchy, stretchy. Okay. This dough has been in the refrigerator. And we'll get to that part because it's important. And so the dough now is like shiny and stretchy. And that's how you know, and it's risen. It's doubled. It's almost doubled in size. Okay? So we'll see that later, but I wanted you to see like how the dough should be. Right? It's like that. Okay? All right. So we're going to set that dough aside. Okay? And we're going to take this dough that has risen like I let my dough rise like 3 times in the bowl. Because once you start to turn that, you put it back in the cold oven and let it sit there and come back in a couple hours. After you've turned it like 3 times, that dough really warms up and it starts to rise. And when it rises, you just knock it down and let it rise again. So I'll let it rise like 2, 3 times max. So what it does is it develops flavor. So when I bake, it takes like 2 days for me to make. I make 2 loaves at a time. It takes like 2 days for this to really come together. And it's the time that brings out the flavor. The more time you give the dough to rise and you knock it down and turn it and let it rise again, the more flavor your bread is going to have. And it's going to have nice, even distributed holes. And it's going to have a really nice crumb and a really tender crust. Okay? So let's take this dough that has been turned 4, 5, 6 times with a couple hours in between, and it's risen like 2 or 3 times. And now we're going to shape it, and we're going to put it in a bread pan. And I'm going to take my little baguette pans out. They're over here. So there's my French baguette pans. Johnny and I actually bought them when we were in Paris. Not that they don't sell them in the United States, because they do, but we walked past this really cool restaurant, supply store. We were on the way to an organ concert. Johnny loved organ music. And we saw this restaurant supply store. So let me just grab the oil right here. My pantry is like right there. 1 second. Okay. All right. So if it's this baguette pan has little holes in it, as you can see. So I won't put parchment paper on it because the little holes help the baguette to bake really evenly. Okay. So I'm just going to oil it a little bit. That's all I'm going to do. And then, so later in the video, I'll turn the video off for a while because this stuff all has to rise. I'm just going to oil this a little bit. And later, this will rise and you'll see it when it's risen. Oh, okay, so here's the other really important thing. When you're turning the dough, like I kind of finished turning mine at night, and then I put it in the refrigerator overnight. It gets it really, really cold. After I finish turning it, it's risen like 2 or 3 times, and then I just put it in the fridge. Because the cold dough is so easy to handle. See, no mess. So this was in the refrigerator. But we'll go over these steps again. So right now I'm just making, this is really just a half a loaf. I used half of this and I made a pizza crust the other night. So I had this half left. So I thought, well, I will just use this in Rosalie's demonstration. Okay, so there it is. It's kind of like a long sausage. I have larger bread pans too, which I'll show you later. But right now, let's put this guy right in here. And then you're going to see it later when it's risen. And then you're going to see the dough later. So there it is right there. All right, so this is what I'm going to do while it's cold. This is really important. But you have to do it when your dough is cold. You know how you see those pretty loaves in the bakeries? And they have slashes in them? So we need to do the same thing here. You need to slash, the dough needs to be slashed. And where's my favorite knife? It's probably in the dishwasher. Nope, there's one. Okay. So we're gonna slash it right now because when it's cold, it slashes great. If the dough is warm, it's messy. So just slice, 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 slice. I make them really, really deep. Slice, 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 slice. And a third one, and I'll show it to you. I'll hold it up to the camera. See, you can see how deep the slashes are. They don't go quite halfway through. All right, so the reason we do this is because when the yeast is eating and belching air, you want your air, your little round holes in your bread to be distributed evenly. And this helps the air to escape, or the belching of the yeast, kind of sounds disgusting, to happen evenly, okay? So now I'm going to put this one in a cold oven with the light on and let it rise. And we'll see that later. And then we'll go back to the dough that we were turning. Okay, and we'll work on that. I'll see you in a little bit. Bye. Okay, so as you can see, Rosalie, this little baby loaf has risen quite nicely. You can see where I had made the slashes, and now it's really, really open. So this one we're going to bake. And when we bake, okay, you bake at 375 for 1 hour and like 15 minutes. Okay, so 375 for an hour and 15 minutes. The bread stays in longer, the crust is going to be too hard on the outside. All right, and we want it to be chewy. So that's what we're going to do with that. But here's the main thing about that. You put it in the oven cold. So like, don't heat up the oven first to 375 and then put this in. Put this in the oven and then turn it on, okay? So we're gonna put this loaf in the oven and then we're gonna turn the oven on and let it heat up to 375 because yeast will live until 110 degrees. So we'll take advantage of that from 0 to 110. It's called oven spring. You'll get a better rise out of it. So that's what we're gonna do with that. Okay, I'm gonna set that aside right now. And then our batch that I started earlier has been sitting for like an hour, maybe a little more than an hour. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do what I always do. We're gonna turn it. We're gonna lift it over, turn the bowl, just keep turning it. So we're gonna do that like 6 times. And then now we're gonna add the salt. So 2.5 cups of flour, 1/2 cup of yogurt, 1/2 cup, 3/4 cup of water. So the salt, we're gonna add, I usually put it in my hand and don't measure it, but it's about 1/2 teaspoon. A 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Here, measure it today. Just because I'm doing this with you. Yeah. Just a little less than a 1/2 teaspoon actually. Yeah. I usually do double this, so it's hard for me to like subtract. So that might be too much. Nope, not a 1/2 teaspoon. 1/4 teaspoon. There we go. Sorry, 1/2 teaspoon is when I double this. When I use 5 cups of flour. So we're going to use a 1/4 teaspoon. Should be plenty. The thing about salt, when you've had yogurt and have yogurt in the dough, the salt is not so critical. But so anyway, okay, there's a 1/4 teaspoon. That should be right. Okay. So a 1/4 teaspoon, and then you just work the salt in. Okay. And then sometimes I'll just taste the dough after I've really worked the salt in, and if I think I want a little more, then I add a little more. I kind of play with it depending on depending on the type of flour I've used. Anyway, but the yogurt really changes the taste of the flour anyway. Like if you didn't put yogurt in this and just used the starter and didn't put salt in, the dough would taste really raw. It's just got this funky, try it sometimes, just like make some dough and don't add salt to it and taste it. And it just tastes weird. Anyway, but the yogurt changes the flavor of this dough anyway. Okay, so we've added the salt. So that all I really wanted you to remember was that, you let the dough rest for a couple hours and then add the salt, okay? So I always take my salt shaker out and put it on the counter because otherwise I will forget to add the salt. I've done that, not good. All right, so I'm gonna just let this dough rest again. I've turned it, the salt's in it. I'll taste it later. Maybe we'll add a little more salt, maybe I won't. It's better to add less salt than too much because you can't subtract it. Okay, that. And then this little guy, we're gonna pop this little guy in the oven and bake him up. So the mini loaf is out of the oven. I'll show it to you. Oops, let's lift it up right there. See how much it rose? I mean, it rose a lot. And I think the reason that it rose so much is because we put it in the oven cold and then turned the oven on. And so let it go from 0 to 375. And it was in, this is a tiny loaf, so this was in for an hour. The larger loaf is about an hour and 15. And then the dough we were working on, you're going to see how much it has developed. See, it's starting to get nice and stretchy. It's not, it doesn't have a lot of holes in it. It can really pull. And it actually has started to rise a bit. And I've only turned this like twice between it resting. So when we first put it together and then I let it rest and then we turned it again, we added the salt to it and then it's quite active. So this time it only rested for maybe, I don't know, like 45 minutes and we're getting a really nice, and that's what I really wanted you to see. Actually, let me put a little oil on my hands and then I'll just pick the dough up because it's too hard to use the camera. And see, it's getting nice and stretchy. It's starting to develop. So there we go. Now, this dough is going to double in bulk. I'm going to knock it down and we're going to turn it again. And then it's going to rise again and I'm going to knock it down. And then, because if you let it rise 2 or 3 times, I mean, if you watch Julia Child videos, God bless her, she was so wonderful. She was so cute. She'd let her dough rise like 4 times, whatever. Anyway, so 2 or 3 times works really, really well. I push this down, this will rise again. And, but the more you do this, the better the bread develops. So it's really important. But after 2, 3 times, then put it in the refrigerator. It will rise in the refrigerator. The cold should slow it down, but with really active starter, it's going to rise in the fridge. That's fine. When it comes out of the fridge, you'll be able to handle it. It won't be sticky. You won't have to oil your hands. You saw with this mini loaf that we baked, that dough had come right out of the fridge. It was really cold, easy to shape, really easy to put the slashes in. And then you can go ahead and bake it. So you can run out and buy these pans if you don't have them. But if you don't want to buy pans, you can take a cookie sheet, put some parchment on the cookie sheet. Your dough will be nice and cold and easy to shape, and it will hold its shape. And put your slashes in it. You can make it round. You can make it oblong, whatever you want. So if you have any questions, just give me a call or text me. And happy baking. Bye.